Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the third of our webinar series, Transitioning to Digital, the Big Picture, hosted by the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica and supported by UNESCO's Information for All program, IFAP. My name is Cordel Green, and my role is to introduce today's webinar, which will explore how the creative economy is likely to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, the ethical framework within which businesses and individuals will need to operate, and the importance of agile leadership, information systems, and digital literacy in the larger digital transformation process. There will be 3 presentations, after which the presenters have agreed to stay on for an additional 30 minutes to answer your questions. So please post your questions or comments in the feed and use the social media handles displayed on the screen if you wish to direct your question to a specific presenter. Without further ado, I am very much pleased to introduce Kenia Mattis, CEO and co-founder of ListenMe, an award-winning animation and design studio. Kenia was the Spark the Fire pitch winner at the 2016 Global Entrepreneur Summit at Stanford University, hosted by President Obama. Dr. Anna Perkins is a commissioner at the Broadcasting Commission and the Senior Program Officer of Quality Assurance, University of the West Indies, Mona Campus. She is the co-author of Ethics Amidst COVID-19, a brief ethics handbook for Caribbean policymakers and leaders. And Professor Anthony Clayton is the Alcon Professor of Caribbean Sustainable Development at the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus. He's a fellow of the Caribbean Academy of Sciences and the World Academy of Sciences and chairman of the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica. Welcome all, and it's over to you, Kenia.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Cordel, and good morning to everyone else on the panel. So we have chosen a very exciting topic today, and so I'm just going to jump right in. I want to answer a few questions from what does the shift to digital mean for the creative economy, and just talk briefly about what are some of the growth opportunities for us as creatives in the business. I run an animation and design studio in Jamaica called ListenMe Caribbean. So that's where many of my perspectives are coming from, but hopefully they'll be applicable to others in other fields as well. So first of all, when I'm referring to the creative economy, what I'm talking about really is the trade of goods and services that are involved in that value chain that creates IP, which is turning creative expression into IP. In our case, that's animation, sound, music, videos, to producing it, turn that into files, items, and what traditionally have been live performances. Now we're seeing a lot more online performances. Marketing them to build an audience, distributing and selling them, and financing the growth of your project, your company, your business. And so all of this really has implications in terms of how we produce and how we deliver and where our audience is if we're talking about shifting from digital to online or in person to digital. And one of the critical things to remember here is why we're doing this shift in the first place. We are in this space because there is a virus that basically going outside is seen to be unsafe, right? And so if it's safer to consume, to create, and to collaborate online, then that means that there's going to be a shift in our thinking. And that shift in our thinking all of a sudden creates new habits where what we used to do outdoors, we're now looking for ways to do them while we are at home, while we are in a safe space. And yes, if outside opens up again, that might change, but that shift in habit is going to definitely affect how we create IP, how we produce, how we market, how we sell our products, and how we finance the growth of our businesses. And here are a couple ways how I see that happening. First of all, if we are shifting our habits in terms of doing things online, first of all, in the space of knowledge and ideas and how we learn new things, how we create new things, we're actually seeing a shift in that, people are, whereas there would have been an intransigence against, we need, or should I say, it's optimal, of course, for us to learn in person. However, I see where there's a lot more opportunities opening up now to online learning of skills. And primarily that's because, of course, there's a closure in schools around the world. So digital educational platforms have emerged to the point where 1.2 billion kids globally have been affected by this and are now learning at home. So this opens up the opportunities for us to use educational content that is creative, but used in the learning and teaching of new skills online. For IP creation as well, whereas a lot of times you would have, a writer's room for an animation company would definitely ideally be in person. Now we're seeing that because of, online platforms, creating IP in a collaborative space, but that's digital, means that we can now shift our habits to including more global partners in the creation process. One of the things that I've seen that is very interesting at this time is that we're working on a few projects, and if before it would have been less optimal to include a Caribbean team because we are, in the distance, or we would be near where Cordel's background is, sun, sea, and sand, and people might want to meet with somebody else who's, next door in downtown LA and get in a room. Now that the room is Zoom, we can actually participate in calls just as easily as anyone else, in the US can or in the UK can. So it actually opens the doors for more opportunities for Caribbean creatives. For products and services, I think there's a shift in our habits in how we produce, how we promote, how we deliver, and how we consume products and services. There's so many more free tools available that we can use to produce products and to produce new content. And that means that there's a lot more content production that's happening. In terms of promotion, because people's attentions are shifting online, what's really critical for online, for any company, whether you sell cars, whether you sell, TVs, any consumer good, you're seeing that content is what's going to get you noticed. And so the production of creative content and including more creative professionals in that process is super important. How we deliver goods and services, there are many more online platforms that are emerging to ensure that creators not only can distribute their work, but can also get paid for their work as well. TikTok just announced that they're launching a $200 million fund that will directly pay the creators on their platform, which hadn't been done before, just because of the boom of that platform since this time has been, since COVID has been in progress. And how we consume content as well. There's a lot more consumption and production of user-generated content. We're seeing a lot more consumption of content that is seen to be authentic. It's seen to be made by the people for the people, because trust online is basically the currency of how brands are built. And so how we produce and how we consume is super important, but also where we find our information is super critical. So security, the value for that is also increased. And I see that how all of that now factors into the money. If you're talking about the economy, it's not just, doing things for fun, but how we finance the growth of our platforms, of our companies, and of our products. And I think there are 4 ways how they'll be shifting our habits in terms of how we raise money and how we gain money and how we make money from our content. One is grant funding. I see where there are more grant funding opportunities for artist residencies. Kingston Creative just announced a new opportunity for creatives in the Caribbean, promoting collaboration as well. I think that loans and financing instruments from financial institutions that may previously have sort of been looking at the creative economy as a high risk area are now opening up to that idea that this is really where large opportunities are. So there may be more opportunities for financing through financial instruments as well. Thirdly, investment. I see where there are many investment houses that are looking to put their money into creative businesses because they see that as a future area of growth. And also sales. Super important. The big question in the Caribbean, which many countries in the world have already solved as well, how do we get people to pay for creative content? Remember that, for people to pay for music when it is seen as an intangible, something you can get for free, has always been a challenge. But now that there are fewer opportunities for live performances and artists are looking for ways to make money online, I think that people are placing a higher premium or higher value on the time and the quality and the products and services of these artists. And so whereas there's an increased appetite for payment for the work of artists and creatives, we're now seeing where there are more instruments that will allow people to pay online. Locally, we now have a new Visa card entrant that NCB has now announced. We have more payment platforms that are emerging that will allow people who are unbanked to now participate in online sales and purchases. So that area is certainly seeing a lot of growth and change and shifts. Certainly over the last, that have been sped up or accelerated over the last couple of months. So this really means that there's a lot of growth areas for creatives as well. And these areas are in the same parts of the value chain of the creative economy: how we create, how we produce, how we market, how we distribute, and how we sell, and how we finance the growth of our products and services. But what is super interesting is how technology is changing that dynamic and allowing for new ways to do some of these things, because essentially we're in a situation where we're trying to recreate the in-person experience but online. And so we're trying to bring outside inside in many spheres that the creative economy can help companies to do. We're seeing where one area that is, let's say, far-flung for some, but actually really close for others, is about how do we get training, to now happen online? How do we get performances to happen online now? How do we get the things that we would normally want to do offline or in person online? And we're seeing where virtual reality, augmented reality, using games to have live concerts are new areas where in the production part of the value chain and in the distribution and sales part of the value chain right there, that would normally happen in person, we're now looking at ways to offer those virtually. So using technology to really grow, live concerts online, improve VR experiences. How can, even in the medical field, if you might want to repair or to do medical, procedures, or if you might want to repair things remotely, you can now use technology to basically create or bridge that experience online. And a lot of that has to do with actually creating IP, producing it and distributing it. But then I think that for how we learn, how we create, how we promote, if production just for creative companies, such as mine, for instance, would normally happen in person, we're now looking at ways where there are growth opportunities to take advantage of those online. For instance, we used to offer an in-person workshop that would help kids to write and create their own stories, and teach them how to illustrate and principles of storytelling. We had, for the very first time, an online version of this the other day, just last week actually, where we had persons sign up online to learn animation in an online 1-week camp. And these are persons who had never thought of doing that before, but because of the convenience, they're now interested in learning how to, acquire this new skill in a space that previously would have been prohibited. So I think that growth opportunities in learning, in how we create, how we promote, and how we distribute and sell are going to be really critical for creative professionals operating in the creative economy, because there's new technology that supports this shift of habit from an offline space to an online space. And this has some real implications for the creative ecosystem. What will it look like in the future? How will we be creating IP, producing IP, marketing it, distributing it, and financing it as we grow? Now, there's so many business functions that are important in this. I cannot stress enough that the creative economy is not just a bag of artists sit down and creating. No, It includes business leaders, project managers, producers, designers, event planners, finance managers, data collection analysts, admin logistics personnel, and software developers. All these persons are now looking at ways to deliver services in a new innovative space. And where I see the shift happening in the ecosystem is that all of these skill sets are now interacting with software developers, web developers, to find ways to offer their services in a digital platform. So I think the demand for, for coders, the demand for persons who are skilled in, for my company alone, we had to look at how we could create that same experience in person online by creating new software, by creating new online tools that would help us to get people to feel as if they were learning with an even pace, that they were learning the skills that they needed, and that could experience what we wanted them to experience. So I think that what's important that could really shift the ecosystem here is that if we are to look at how the ecosystem can become more robust and also more remote, it will improve how we will integrate not just creative companies, but other skill sets as well into a strong and vibrant creative ecosystem. And this really impacts the creative economy, I think drives a transformation in the digital age toward social changes, cultural transformation, political transformation, economic transformation, and educational transformation. And I say this, and I'll die on this hill, because what's important in the digital age is authenticity. Now that everyone is online, trust is the number one currency. And what I mean by this is there's so many offerings, there's so many, you see an ad, you see everybody tweeting, you see so much information coming at you. But you're gonna go with a service provider or a creative person that you trust. And so because the creative economy is really built on knowledge and ideas and sharing that in a way that attracts people, we're seeing that creative expression can actually drive transformation socially, culturally, politically. For example, from an educational platforms perspective, now platforms are interested in not just teaching persons the way they normally would, but coming up with innovative ways to excite the attention of students using creative videos, using music to get persons to learn new things. Culturally as well, we saw how with the recent competition that happened on Versus, where we saw the creative economy not just on display, but then you saw it boom into, sales for t-shirts, sales for online concerts. And I think also just a refreshing vision of what our life can be, how it can be displayed, how our culture can be displayed online. So I do think that this transformation really happens at the core of how we share ideas and how we reach people. And through more content creation, that increases the opportunities for marketing for new products, how we entertain ourselves, and also the ability for persons to earn while doing this online as well. Lastly, I think that the real question here, if we look at the creative economy, is how can we as a country capitalize on where we are now? And I think that there are really three core things that are important. And it comes back to this initial question of what does the shift mean for the creative economy. I think that there are opportunities for us to look at the value chain, right? And for us to look at where it is that we have our strengths, where we can increase our collaboration with not just people here, but people in other countries that are in areas that we want to get into. I think that there are opportunities for us to get on platforms that can market our work globally. And thirdly, I think that there are opportunities for us to solve real problems for companies who want to innovate, reach people in a digital way first. And so because of all of this, the shift to digital, what it really means for the creative economy is it means an increase in earning potential, which is super important. And that earning potential is based on what the creative economy is built on. which is knowledge and ideas, authenticity at the end of the day, and how you can create content that people trust, that people emotionally connect with, and people want to see more of and will actually pay for, or you can use that to help them to pay for a product or service that you might be promoting. And so that for me encapsulates what the shift to digital means for the creative economy. Over to you, Cordel.
Thank you so much, Kenia. Really brilliant context there of the locating the creative economy properly as now a main driver of the general economy and characterized by innovation, which in fact defines the age in which we are operating. And also pointing us to the fact that the operating systems of society are changing. Now, this throws up a lot of ethical issues, some new and some old. And we now ask Anna Perkins to give us her perspective on the ethical framework which will undergird this transformation you've just framed for us. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks very much, Cordel. It's really good to be here. I also want to say special thanks to Kenia for such a really stimulating presentation that I think lays a good foundation for some of what I'm going to share and perhaps even do a little bit of building on and integration. So what ethics got to do with it? Let's talk a little bit about ethics and what it means and why it's important and valuable in this digital age. Now, at its simplest, ethics is a system of moral principles that affect how people make decisions and live their lives. It's about right and wrong. It's about personal goodness and societal justice. So ethics attempts to answer three questions. What's the right thing to do? What does it mean to be a good person? And how can we make sure that the society that we live in is one that treats people well? That is what ethics is about. Good people doing the right things and making sure that we live in societies that are just. Now, is ethics important? I would say a resounding yes. Ethics is important. It's important for several reasons. It provides us with tools for moral decision making. It helps us to demonstrate that each person is valued, valuable, and should be treated fairly and with respect. Ethics supports our individual development as persons into the best persons that we can be. It contributes to us living better together in society, and in so doing, it makes the world that we're a part of a better place. Now, I suspect that few of you would be surprised if you heard me say that I think ethics is even more important today when we live in a space where everything that we do takes place in the digital environment. A time where using digital technologies is basically second nature. So we know we're living and transitioning more into a digital age where our actions have scalar effect. They can just be upscaled to have massive impact on the lives of many people. And as Kenia pointed out to us, not just people who are next door to us or even in our island location, but in other global and international spaces. So that being the case, we really do have to learn how to live more ethically in such a space. Now, building on Kenia's perspective and putting it in my own language from the ethical perspective, it's important for me to just tell you what I mean when I'm speaking of digital technology or digital technologies, which can be used interchangeably. So digital technologies, there are these electronic tools, systems, devices, and resources that generate, store, help us to process data. So think about WhatsApp, think about Instagram, think about this very popular game, online game, PUBG, laptops of all different sorts, driverless cars, GPS, ATMs, biometric access, search engines like Google, ordinary cell phones. All of those form part of the digital technologies that frame the digital environment within which we're functioning these days. Given the importance of digital technologies in our lives, is there a special ethics that there ought to be for the digital space? So I'm going to answer you by saying both yes and no. Yes, if only insofar as we have to deal with ethical issues that did not arise in the pre-digital age or may not have been as much moment in that time. So think, for example, of questions of privacy and data management or data ownership that are peculiar to our time. We live in this global fishbowl, right? And everything that we do is available for public consumption, and our private data is out there to be monetized, commercialized. How do we give consent in spaces like that? What about using digital technologies for surveilling and control? Do we need to be told who is doing the surveilling, what the surveillance is being used for? Can we, as individual persons, surveil others, use technologies to follow them, to stalk them? Ought we do? Yeah? Digital technologies change how we form relationships and how we communicate, and not always for the better, of course. So these days you find we talk about how our attention spans have gotten so tight, 45 seconds or less, and we're gone. Or what about all these people who are amassing thousands of friends online who they'll never meet with in person? Or think about the issues around amassing followers on platforms like Instagram, which holds many of our young people in this tight grip where they are so connected to all these digital followers, but they're still lonely, very, very lonely. Yeah? So digital technologies for sure create possibilities for harm on a wider scale than ever before. Information can go viral in a nanosecond, and once it's out there, it can't be recalled or can't be reined in. So activities like revenge porn and cyber stalking are very real experiences of terror for many people in today's current digital environment. But what about my no response? My no response is saying, there's no need for us to have a special ethics for the digital age. So I'm saying no, insofar as digital technologies do not change the fundamental importance of being ethical. That means that even in this space, we still are being called upon to make right choices. We're still being called upon to ask questions about how it is that we're to be good people. And we're still called upon to craft and to create societies that are just, that ensure that each person has a space where they can live equitably and fairly. So a key point I need us to remember right here is that digital technologies are not neutral. They directly impact who we are and what we do for good or for ill. And it is our responsibility to respond ethically to the challenges that digital technologies may pose. Then along comes COVID. And for me, having to wrestle with COVID brought to my attention in a very specific way how important of ethics, that COVID has called us to ask some more questions about how do we live together as a society where so many of us are now forced to work from home, to work online. How do we function as a nation where so many of us have to live in vulnerable circumstances where health and livelihood are in danger? How do we behave so that everyone can have access to good information? Everyone has a fair chance to be protected from the virus or to be given treatment if they fall ill? Or how do they manage to thrive in spite of these challenges? How can digital technologies help, hinder, or worsen this circumstance? And so here are some of the things that I believe we can do when we think about how to act ethically in a digital environment, but certainly one that has been largely impacted by the COVID pandemic. So first of all, as a society, we should ensure that everyone has access to the internet. COVID has exposed the sharp divide that exists in Jamaica between those who have and those who don't have access to the internet. We can't fool ourselves about the internet anymore. It's not a luxury. We need it to participate in society fully. We need to be able to work, to learn, to play, to communicate with family and friends, and so on to the list of the reasons that we ought to be able to have access online and not have this digital divide, I think is certainly very clear. Practically, therefore, those of us who are able to should find ways of donating internet-ready devices to students who don't have access by that simple means. We should, where possible, be kind and neighborly and share our own internet resources if we can. Lobby for hotspots, public hotspots, and that certain web pages be zero rated, find ways of creatively using our social media platforms so that customers can be connected with small businesses who are under pressure in a time of COVID. Secondly, I think we also need to make sure that we protect the vulnerable. And among the vulnerable are to be found our children. So we have to remember that not everyone or everything on the internet is intended for good or means well. Many people are going to take and have been taking this opportunity to capitalize on the fear that COVID has caused many of us to feel. So they're offering all kinds of fake COVID cures. And you may well have heard recent stories again coming out of the US, where many people got ill from drinking certain kinds of disinfectant. We can also need to remember that shoddy or dangerous products are going to be offered in that regard. Numerous scams are out there that are aimed at people who are out of work. And being out of work and the impact on our livelihood is a very real worry and concern for many of us. Then misinformation, disinformation, mischief, and fake news are rife in this COVID space. When in doubt, we should always remember to check it out. Go to well-known fact-checking sites like snoops.com, or very simply just Google it. Remember not to share too much information about yourself online. Identity theft and fraud are very much rampant. We have to make sure to keep abreast of the newest and latest schemes so that we don't fall victim. So we can't walk around in blinders. We have to have our ears and our eyes open so we know more about what's out there. Don't click on random links or pop-ups here. This can lead to our accounts being hacked. And we know just again a few weeks back how very prominent Twitter accounts were hacked. And if they're going to hack prominent Clicker accounts, why would the Clicker account of Joe or Joan Public be safer? No, not at all. The Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica has an internet and traditional media campaign to ask ourselves, what if, geared towards certainly young people who are the ones that are oftentimes in the digital space and unaware of the ethics of the space. So the Commission reminds us, before you share, post, or click, ask yourself, what if? What if the information that you're sharing is not true? What if that information is dangerous or harmful? What if that video or photo is of one of your loved ones or somebody else's loved ones? You know, so I'd like to point you to the BCJ website and to the link there on our screen that can give you more information about this particular campaign. Now you have to remember that old time people used to say, not everything good to eat, good for talk. And I think we can translate that as we've considered ethics in the digital environment by saying that in the digital age, not everything you see, think, do, good for post or good for share. Of course, importantly, don't create harmful or dangerous content to begin with. Put in place and maintain media rules in your house. So parents and guardians, we need to remember that it's important to put rules in place and to stick to them. So limit media time, even though we know we're in spaces now where our children are learning remotely. We should still time what they do, monitor, co-media with them, which means that we should be online while they're online, looking at what they're looking at their habits, how they maneuver in the digital space so that we can guide them to better habits of media use. And of course, help them to choose and ensure that they choose age-appropriate games and movies and apps and so on. Teach them online rules about online security. You know, not sending photos on the internet, not giving out their name and all of that. And always check with an adult before you download files and apps. And I've included on this slide here some very useful websites that can help you learn more about how to keep your children and our children safe in the digital environment. Importantly for us, as adults, I'd like to remind us that we need to read and keep ourselves informed, ask questions of ourselves and others. And again, on screen, I've posted some recommended reading, including the tiny little handbook that myself and another colleague created about ethics in the COVID-19 context. So, in closing, here's what I want to remind us of. Ethics is important for how we live and are in the world. It's particularly important in the digital age where we face new problems and technologies that have scalar effect for good or for ill. COVID-19 has significantly increased the need for us to engage digitally, while it's highlighting and perhaps worsening the socioeconomic divide that exists in our society. I'm saying that we need to take individual, personal, and corporate responsibility for how we behave so that each and every person will have the chance to live well and to participate in this, our digital society. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that stimulating presentation, reminding us that we're living in times that require a very different intelligence, not just at the individual level, but at the corporate level and nationally. And that's a very good segue to Professor Anthony Clayton, who will help us now to examine the bigger picture, this larger, more complex, transformational process that we have to be undergoing as we transition to a digital economy and society. Over to you, Prof. Clayton.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to be talking about some of the factors that we think will shape our future world. One of them is that human population is growing. There's almost 8 billion people in the world today. By the time we get to the end of the century, we think there will be 2.5 to 5.5 billion more people than there are alive today. So we're going to have to think about ways that we're going to be able to provide enough housing, food and water for all of those extra people. One of the parameters which gives us most grounds for concern is that by the time we get to the end of the century, the world will probably be something like 3 degrees warmer than it is now. There's a margin of error because there are so many, it's such a complex equation, but it will be at least 2 degrees warmer, maybe as much as 7 degrees warmer. At that point, we are looking at catastrophic consequences with the forced migration of hundreds of millions of people away from parts of the world, which, by the way, then will be uninhabitable. So this is a fate that we have to avoid for the future of humanity. One of the things that we're going to have to be dealing with, probably by the time we get to mid-century, is the rate of increase in demand for food, water, energy, materials, all the things that make our current way of life possible. At the moment, the world needs about 40 billion tons of materials a year. By the time we get to 2050, that will be at least 90 billion tons of materials a year. And in some cases, it's not clear where we're going to be able to find those resources. We're going to be experiencing resource shortages. One of the resources that we're already starting to hit into some limits is water. And by the time we get to 2030, we think that something like half of humanity will be living in water-stressed areas. So we have to make a choice. We have to choose what kind of future that we want. This graphic demonstrates the very different future that we have to choose. If we stay on the current trajectory, which is where climate change is advancing more quickly than the rate at which we can change over our technologies, then by the time we get to somewhere between 2050 and 2100, we are probably looking at a number of catastrophic outcomes. Alternatively, the other road that we can take, is that we try to accelerate our transition to a much more energy and resource efficient way of life, based on renewable energy sources, buildings that do not consume energy or consume no more energy than they generate, autonomous vehicles which are very much more efficient than today's generation of manual vehicles. And these and other solutions will resolve our problems with resources, the availability of resources, and also with climate change. So I think more than at any time in human history, we actually have to make a conscious decision as to what kind of future world we want. If we decide that we want to survive, when we're going to have to take the steps necessary to make that happen, then we're going to have to make a decision to shut down a large number of industries in the course of the next 20, 30 years. And here's some of them. We have coal, oil and gas, conventional manufacturing and construction, extensive agriculture, shipping, logistics, retail and sales as we do them now, conventional education, a lot of the way that we provide professional services, conventional modes of transport, and a lot of the way that we run the business of government right now. Coal, oil and gas, we need to make a transition to renewables, manufacturing, construction to fabricators, 3D printers, extensive agriculture to tissue vats and biofermentation reactors. Shipping and logistics are going to be substituted by autonomous systems. Retail and sale, of course, has already been killed in the marketplace by online retail. Conventional systems of government can be done very much more efficiently by making a lot of our systems online and backed up by AI rather than humans. Conventional modes of transport, again, replaced largely by autonomous systems. A lot of professional services can be done much more cheaply and made universally available by AI. And this, of course, also goes for a lot of the ways that we run our universities at the moment. We need to make a transition to a completely different model of education with lifelong learning, and we cannot do that with our current educational structures. The reason for optimism is that we're also in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution. Now, this is where we start to see the integration of many different areas, cutting-edge developments in science and technology, including AI, robotics, nanotechnology, molecular engineering, biotechnology, all of which, of course, is underpinned by our new understanding of the science of informatics. And we're already going through the fastest transition in human history. Of the previous industrial revolutions, they typically happened over a number of generations. But now we're seeing profound changes come within a matter of years. So one recent estimate suggests that the pace of change is now approximately 3,000 times faster than in the first industrial revolution. So this gives us grounds for cautious optimism. Maybe if we can accelerate this transition, we will actually escape the constraints of critical resource shortages and climate change. There are going to be some very significant human challenges for all of us as we go through this transition. One recent estimate suggests that by the time we get to 2050, the world's workforce will be about 6 billion strong. And of those, only 1 billion will be in a job that exists today. So we are going to have to invent whole new ways of working and thinking about work and the structure of employment. Just think about some of the implications. Of today's jobs, some of them will change, they'll adapt, they'll evolve. Others will simply disappear because we can do them better, faster, cheaper with AI and robotics. A rule of thumb is that your job will change if somewhere around about half of what you do can be automated. It will be automated if over 70% of what you do is actually routine. Now, surprisingly, this is not just low-skilled jobs. This actually takes out a lot of activities in what we currently think of as high-skill areas, including law, medicine, and finance. And one of the drivers behind this change is, in fact, the military. In the fairly near future, I think we will be using autonomous lethal systems instead of soldiers. There is no, in the very near future, for example, fighter aircraft. Any fighter aircraft with a human on board will be outfought and outmaneuvered by autonomous UCAVs. And that means that how we think about every aspect of life is going to change. How this plays out in particular economies depends on this current structure of the economy. If this change happened in the UK today, something like 25% of jobs would change and 10% of the jobs would cease to exist. In low-income countries, the impact is likely to be more significant. Something like 90% of the 400 million jobs in low-income countries could be automated. So in a country like Ethiopia, for example, that's about 85% of employment, and over half of the jobs in Angola, Mauritius, South Africa, Nigeria, and a number of other countries. So for many developing countries, this is going to be a particular challenge. Can they get the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution and still find a way to very rapidly migrate the workforce into completely new patterns of activity? So when we're thinking about what does the future roadmap look like, well, renewable energy technology is a critical area. Investing in the manufacture production of autonomous vehicles, thinking about how we can do all government services, invest in fabricators, additive manufacturing, biofarming of various different kinds, and radically distributed modes of working. The COVID crisis has taught a number of industries that they can operate more efficiently by having a workforce that never has to come into the office. And it strikes me as being astonishing that some people want to go back to what we had before. What we should actually be doing is seeking to accelerate the transition to distributed modes of working. It's better for people, it's better for productivity, it's better for corporate profits. So instead of trying to go back to where we were, we should be learning the important lessons of COVID and actually seeking to extend that process. And of course, augmented education. I think a lot of our education in future will not be coming from humans, but from AI systems. And this is going to enable us to achieve our dream of universally available, globally available, high standards of education. Now, the skills that you'll need for working, living, surviving in this very new kind of world, well, you have to think about what makes you human. You have to think about what you can do that will be supplemented by AI systems. And there are a few things that AI systems are not good at. One of them is critical thinking, intuition, and that includes, for example, emotional intelligence, social networking, and entrepreneurialism. And these are all things which humans at this point are better at than AI systems. So these are things that you need to be thinking about in your next career decisions. These are the attributes and the skills that will stand you in good stead in the years to come. And of course, these have to be supplemented by a range of technical skills. It will be difficult for anybody to survive in the future world if you're not fairly comfortable, conversant, fluent with information and communication technologies. You have to understand the importance of research and engineering, and you have to be good at logistics. This is not just about moving things around the place. It's actually organizing the people, organizing the system that develop new services and new products and gets them to market. And of course, creative skills, designers, visionaries, conceptualizers. These are uniquely human skills, at least to date. And these are the kind of areas where you need to invest your efforts when you're thinking about future education. It's important to realize that the extent to which AI systems are now encroaching on the areas that we used to think of as uniquely human. Although it's early days and the systems are still very clumsy, humans are getting better at detecting emotions from the tone of your voice or from facial expressions and adjusting what they're doing accordingly. And of course, genetic algorithms, which are bits of computer code that go through many, many iterations, look at outcomes, adjust the results, and then rerun. This is a form of learning. And we now have computer programs that actually can learn and get better. We used to think of as learning as a uniquely human attribute, but this is no longer the case. So we have to also rethink how we interface with AI. Well, machines are not infallible, and we're not either. So what we have to think about is, where are the areas where we can work in complementary ways? Humans are not actually very good at routine tasks, at least most of us are not. But humans are good at judgment calls. So we have to think about how we can work more closely with AI systems, with the AI doing a lot of the analytical work and humans making a final judgment call. And even though humans are moving into high-skilled areas like surgery, dentistry, flying aircraft, and so on, it's also important to ensure that humans are de-skilled, because sometimes you have what's called an out-of-bounds condition, a condition that was not anticipated when the program was written, and humans have to be able to recognize that and know when to resume control, which of course they won't be able to do if they've been de-skilled. Now, with regard to leadership skills, clearly, one of the things that you will need is agility, the ability to move on from conventional ways of working, conventional ways of thinking, to see change as inevitable, but also see it as not as a threat, but as an opportunity to move into new areas of business and educational development, opportunities to grow your company or whatever it is, where it is you're working, and to be more innovative. It has to be said, this requires a certain amount of courage. Many people are quite risk averse. I don't think that is going to work very well as a strategy, because the pace of change now is unprecedented. So you have to be more ready to face the relative unknown and to change course as required. Rapid learning is going to be at a premium. It's going to be very important to rapidly assess what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, and to make a quick and effective decision as to how you need to change. And as our earlier speaker pointed out, authenticity is vital. People do not react well to inauthentic comments. We have a huge problem at the moment with lies and inauthenticity and fake news clogging up the world's media. We're going to have to find ways to deal with this and contend with it so that we get back to authentic dialogue. This is actually going to be vital for the future of democracy, for the health of our social systems, and also, I think, for the fate of humanity. And clarity of focus. There's a very important difference between strategy and tactics. Your tactics are just what you're doing now, day-to-day basis to survive in business. Those have to change. They may have to change quite frequently. It's important to keep sight of your strategy, where it is you're trying to get to, even if you may have to change the means that you're currently using. Keep your strategy in focus. So what skills will we need? Well, you're going to have to be multi-skilled. You're going to have to be able to understand the technical and social and economic issues. You have to be media literate. You have to rethink who's in the workforce. Clearly, concepts like this idea that you retire when you get to a certain age don't make any sense anymore. The rules about retirement came from an era when people didn't usually live more than 2 years after they retired. Today, they're living 30, 40 years after they are retired. We can no longer afford to have that loss of skills from the economy. Similarly, the idea that you get all the education you need at the beginning of your life, and that is good for an entire working career, no longer makes any kind of sense at all. We now have to think about education as something that you go back into and you cycle through over and over again throughout your life, reskilling, readjusting to the new and more rapidly changing environment. And in your businesses, you have to think of what are called no regrets options. We cannot predict the future with any kind of certainty. So whatever it is you're doing, think about how it might work under more than one different future scenario. Never assume that tomorrow is going to be pretty much like today. In today's world, that may no longer be the case. And for us here, what should we do? Well, if we are sensible and we grasp the opportunity presented by the move to remote learning, there will be very significant efficiency gains and cost reductions. So we really should not be trying to go back to pre-COVID ways of doing business and living. What we should be doing is trying to learn the lessons from what's happened and capitalize on those lessons. The government should seize this opportunity to try to accelerate Jamaica's transition to an all-digital economy, which is going to be a key competitive tool. Countries, the international competitiveness of countries will depend very much in future on the extent to which they have made this transition to an all-digital economy. That means that we have to look at Jamaica's digital switchover process, we have to try to accelerate it, and we have to build out modern internet and media infrastructure, which will operate at the kind of speeds and with reliability that we need. And what we have to do in parallel is upgrade our legislation and regulation. The regulations, legislation for media and broadcasting in this country now are over 20 years out of date. They were written for a bygone age. This no longer makes sense. We need to have a comprehensive redraft of legislation and regulation for this area. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Clayton. To say that was a lot of food for thought would be an understatement. What I have gleaned from the three really brilliant presentations, the thread that links it all together is that as we think about the new world and how we frame society and new relations, ethically aligned design is critical, and we must keep humans in the middle. After all, ultimately, whatever transition takes place, it has to be human-centric. We thank you so much, the three of you, for your enlightening perspectives, and we hope that you, the audience, found the information to be valuable and a stimulus for action and change. The Broadcasting Commission and UNESCO's IFAP have collaborated on these series to help people find a direction of travel in these uncertain times, and we hope that we have achieved that. The presenters will be responding to your questions and comments for the next 30 minutes. We want to thank the three of you for agreeing to be online for an additional 30 minutes. Thank you so much, all of you, for tuning in. Stay safe. Goodbye.